Okay, we've arrived at part 2 of the puzzle thing. If you haven't seen part 1, what the are you doing here? Go back, go watch part 1. So what we've done so far is we've made the puzzle transition thing. By the way, again, if you want it to be a completed sphere and not just a hemisphere, literally just take this whole setup that we've made and literally just copy it over onto the other half to fill it out because they fit into each other. But long story short is, you at least know how you would do that, right? And between this episode and the last one, the only thing I've changed is I've inverted the materials a bit so that the exterior is the one with the white material and then the rest is the black material, the interior, right? Because we want one material to be the texture of the Earth or Mars or the Moon or whatever, and the interior should be wooden. So let's talk about how you project stuff and do materials and things like this. So first thing we need to do is I've already decided on the images I want to use. I've downloaded them into my desktop somewhere. Yeah, we have the Earth and the Moon. You can switch them out for any two like spherical objects. They don't even need to be planets. They could be like, you could switch from your left to your right testicle. I don't even know. Okay, so let's do some UV unwrapping. I'm gonna select the camera, I'm gonna select the empty, I'm going to invert this so only the puzzle pieces are selected, and just make sure that at some point you like shift click one of these to make it an active object, okay? The reason we do this is now you can actually go into edit mode, otherwise you would not be able to, you need to have an active object. And with these, what we can actually do, and I think this was like a 2.8 edition, is you can actually UV unwrap multiple objects. So I'm just selecting everything, U, project from view, which might take a second since there's a lot of geometry, and you can see we now have this sphere. I mean, it's stretched, but in general, it's projected here, okay? Only thing we need to do is I'm just gonna load in the Earth or either or of the images, and I'm just gonna set this up so it is roughly, and again, it doesn't need to be perfect, right? This image was taken with a different focal length than the camera we have in 3D space. Like, we're not going to get it perfect, but just generally get your UV unwrap overlapping with the Earth or whatever image you have here, okay? The reason we do this is now if we go to the exterior material, which I'm calling Patreon because I mean, it's a dirty tactic, but either way, if we go into this material and we load in an image texture, specifically the Earth texture that I found on Google Images, plug it in, you can now see that the Earth is projected around this. Now, of course, we're going to get heavy distortion, like where it's going tangent to the camera view vector, and that's just an artifact of project from view. But you can see it's sticking onto it. Why is it doing that? It's because it's, even though it's not showing it, this image is in fact using, why am I not in full screen? Somebody should have said something. Nobody raised their hand. It's using the UV unwrap that we obtained using project from view, right? So if we were to just look at this UV map, you can see it's actually moving with it, okay? So everything works out. So let's do a bit of modification to this material so we can actually do the transition. So I'm also going to import another image texture. This one's going to be the transition thing too. So for example, the moon. And we could do two project from view. So you can see it's almost correct, but clearly this was a bit smaller of an image than the other. They don't perfectly overlap. And you could do, again, a second UV unwrap, but that's a lot of work. So instead, I'm just going to open up the texture coordinates. That's Control-T if you have Node Wrangler. If you don't deserve to be watching this tutorial. It's a free add-on. You just go to Edit Preferences, Enable Node Wrangler. All I'm going to do is I'm just going to mess around with the texture coordinates. So let's make it a bit smaller, and in effect, making the image take up more space. So we go less than 1, and then we just adjust the x-axis. So you can just imagine what we're doing here is essentially messing around with the UV coordinates in this space. Like this moving around is the same as doing it with the nodes. So let's go back to the nodes. So I'm just going to shift this. So I think that was a bit too much, 0.03. Okay, and then let's also transition this up a bit, 0.02. And I think we just need to slide these around until it's roughly perfect. And I'm just going to make it a bit smaller. And also shift it a bit more. Again, you could always do two UV unwraps. But you can see now we have this projected on as well, and it moves with it. So the question is, how do we transition between one and the other? You could do a fancy method with like, back facing and all this. What I would recommend is we're literally just gonna, transition. We're gonna crossfade between one and the other. So we're gonna mix RGB. The way mix RGB works is, let's just view the result of this. If my mouse will actually do what it's supposed to. It actually lets us transition between one or the other. So where are we doing this transition point? Well, obviously where the puzzle is kind of like mostly the black other material, because then you wouldn't notice it, okay? So what we're going to do here is timeline. I'm going to keyframe, so hover over this and hit I, and then we go a couple frames down. Let's say around here. We set this to 1, so now it's transitioned to the other. I feel like I have a nose hair or a cat hair. There's something messing with my nose right now. Either way, we've now animated this. You're going to see the keyframes when you select the node and an object that has that material inherited. And you can see we have the Earth, and it transitions to the Moon in what appears to be a flawless transition, but really it's just a crossfade, okay? Cool, so now we have the base kind of thing for this, but let's make it look better. Couple things we can do. First of all, lighting. You could add lights like a schmuck, or HDRI Haven. Just download a free HDRI, load it in. I'm gonna pick this one. Just so that we don't see the background, film, transparent, it's gone. And now we have realistic lighting, and you can see the pieces are shadowing, and they're doing the whole thing, okay? So cool, we have lighting. Couple other things to make it look more realistic. This is not physically accurate at all, but what I do recommend is we're gonna take this Mix RGB, which again is the transition between these two image textures. I'm gonna plug it into a bump node and plug that into the normal socket. This is just to get some normal detail out of this image, which I'm gonna make very subtle. So again, this isn't physically accurate. Like in real life, the puzzle is like perfectly smooth, like plasticky, glossy stuff. So I'm gonna make it even less intense. But I do think it adds into this kind of weird realism thing. So I'm gonna do it. And speaking of low roughness, let's set that like low to 0.2 or something. Just so it's like reflecting a bit. Kind of like a puzzle would. And this is argument to bring the normal even lower. But I do like that effect that it contributes. Okay. Only other thing I want to add to this, just because it happens to be planets, and I'm just going to bring the roughness up a bit. Just because it happens to be planets, I think it's always a good excuse to throw around the Fresnel node. Again, this is the Fresnel node, long story short. It looks at like the view angle between the camera and the geometry, and really what it does is it makes this like halo atmosphere thing. That's what we care about. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to color ramp it by making it a bit more intense like that, and then we incorporate this by just mixing it together. So Mix RGB, use this as the factor. Let's view this. And you can see if we add in any kind of atmosphere, whether it be blue or green or whatever, it only shows up on the perimeter, okay? So we do it like that, and I'm just gonna make it a little less intense. So I'm just gonna bring that down. So this is without. Let's look at the perimeter, so look at this area. Without, with, it just adds a bit of something, not too important. In fact, you could even have it be like slightly emissive if you want it to be a bit controversial. And that might be, you know, something you could do. So you connect this to the, wow, I cannot see this node from this far away. I guess we could just go full screen. You take this, we connect it to the emission strength, and then for the emission color, we just set it to like white or whatever you want it to be. And this will make it glow slightly at that. And to make it less intense, you take math, I'm gonna multiply it by like 0.2. Just so it's like, it's there, but it's subtle, okay? So this is before, very emissive, this is after, okay? And this will be inherited for both the Earth part of this thing and also the Moon. So you could switch between these. And in fact, I do think this is still a bit too shiny. 0.4, 0.45, there we go, okay? We have the base Patreon so-named material. Now let's make the wood material. And you could just go to like Texture Haven and download like a PBR wood material, and that's fine. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a very quick procedure one because it works. So to do this, what I'm going to do is, again, now we are in the interior wood, which is applied to all of these. I'm going to use a wave texture as the base color. And I'm thinking, since this is already kind of like a wood grain, all we want to do is like distort this, maybe add some knots and stuff like that. And you could play around with the rings versus bands and all that. I'm going to keep it on bands. I'm going to distort this until it looks a bit random, add in detail so it's a bit sharper. And let's make it look more like jagged and stuff like this. So detail scale, I don't know. It really depends on the kind of wood that you want out of this. Do you want it to be a very fine wood with a lot of like, you know, different things going on, or do you want it to have an overall trend? It's up to you. I'm gonna add in some detail roughness. This just kind of makes it look more like a watermelon, which some people don't like, but I like it. And we can also change around the scale to something bigger, I believe, is what we want. So this just makes the lines really small and, well, whatever. To make it look like wood, you take this design that we basically made that we can play around with, right? You could change whatever you want from this node. We're going to take this, we're going to have it incorporate again into our normal information. So I'm taking this height, converting it using the bump node into normal information, using that on the BSDF. And then for the color pass of this, what I recommend is I'm just going to pick two like wooden colors. So one of them could be like a tan kind of thing, something like that. And then the other one, which I'm just going to copy over, can be like a reddish, darker, brighter, I don't know, puzzle material. You can play around with this. So let's see what it looks like so far. The puzzle opens up, and this is what the wooden pieces look like. If anything, I think the wood is a bit too small, like the thing, so I'm going to bump it up to 10. And we want it to be less obvious, the transition. So let's play around with some of these. One of these will look better than the others. Saw looks very wooden. I do like that. We'll have that, and I think that's kind of like the essence of what I want out of this wood. I think only other thing, just to add in a bit of visual interest, is I'm just going to stain some of these, so some of them are darker than others. So you can see this noise texture. And I think all of this, assuming it's using the correct coordinate system, in this case generated, it should flow with this, right? It doesn't change, right? It sticks onto this is the idea. What was I getting at? And what did I just click to make that happen? The world may never know. I think I was just outside the camera view. Anyways, noise texture, I'm gonna view this. Why is my mouse not working? We're gonna view it. I'm gonna set it to a very large scale so you can see this like change in color is very gradual. Let's do a bit of color ramp just to make it a bit more intense. And again, the idea of this is just like an overall staining, nothing like too intense. So I take this, and before we send this through the BSDF, just like we were doing mix RGB before, we can do mix RGB here. Mix RGB, use this as the factor, and we are going to multiply by black, which is a trick I use all the time. So let's see what that looks like. In other words, what we're doing is we're taking this color and we're darkening it because we're multiplying by 0. We're multiplying by black only where this thing exists. And this just adds in a bit of like visual interest. So this is before, everything's kind of the same shade. After, there's a bit of variation going on. And you can choose the amount of contribution this has by changing this, I believe, this slider. But now we have a wooden material, and we have the moon. We have the earth. Let's just kind of view what we have so far. So we have the earth. It transitions. The wood is exposed, and at this point, the crossfade is happening again at the Patreon material on this Mix RGB. It's doing that whole thing, and then it's merging into the moon. Pretty cool. I mean, and the nice thing about this is that at any point you could just download another image, and just like having it go from the earth to something else is literally as easy as switching out this image texture from moon to something else. So other than that, I mean, like what you want to do is up to you. Like you could add in a background, you could do all sorts of things. But what I'm thinking is this is like a fine render as is. I kind of like the way it looks. I don't want to mess with it too much. So I think, unless I'm forgetting something, I think that's the essence of it. That is the general idea of how you do this puzzle transition thing. Again, the only thing, if I was to go back and fix, I just take our whole setup, which is the hemisphere. You take this, you copy it over and like flip it across the x-axis. And you just stick them together because it's no extra work, and you just like link the animation like we did in all this. It might make the project from view a bit weird because we're looking like through the mesh, but whatever. It shouldn't be too noticeable because all those pieces are going to be obscured by these ones. But in general, you get the idea. So hopefully you learned a thing in this tutorial. And what is this on the right? It's, well, before we talk about that, again, I already talked about it in tutorial 1, but this whole idea is entirely based off of the iBotPL, I don't know how to pronounce that, effect that I was allowed to use very graciously in exchange for promoting the ever-living shit out of the Twitter and the Instagram, I think. Basically, the artwork of this person. Really do check this person out. They have this, and they have a bunch of other cool stuff, like an exploding watermelon. Check that out. But what are you seeing on the right? It's a list of patrons, okay? Why are these people on Patreon, and why should you maybe join? Well, they get access to blend files like this one that I've been, again, given permission to post. This and any other blend file I've ever posted, you get with a 1 month subscription. Also exclusive tutorials that I've posted a lot of recently. You can go check those out. They're only for patrons, not for CG Matter Default Cube. Discord access, early access, watch tutorials early. If you want to, you will have click that link in the description, and otherwise you don't. I mean, that's the essence of it. So anyways, hopefully you learned something in this 2-part puzzle tutorial series, and with that, I am out. It's over. See ya.